The coffee stain on Marcus Webb's uniform told the whole story. It was on his left breast pocket, brown, shaped like a rough crescent moon. It had been there for 2 days. He had not washed it out because there was no time, and then because he stopped caring, and then because it became, in some private way he couldn't explain to himself, a kind of armor. A reminder that he was still a person, and not just a serial number in gray fabric. He was standing in front of Colonel Harris's desk when he noticed the colonel wasn't looking at him. The colonel was looking at a map. It was a large printed map of the Kepler 442b colony zone, a flat stretch of rust-colored land the settlers had named New Carthage, which the Vethkai had named a stepping stone. The colony had 17,000 people. It had a power grid, a water processing plant, a medical center, 3 defensive perimeters, a school that doubled as a field hospital, and a grain storage facility that smelled like wet hay and warm metal. It had a ditch. Webb, said Colonel Harris, still looking at the map. Sir, you know Drainage Channel 7? Marcus did know it. Everyone in the garrison knew about it, the way you know about a bad tooth. Not because you think about it, but because it was always there, slightly wrong, slightly forgotten. Channel 7 was a runoff ditch built 8 years ago to stop floodwater from washing out the eastern perimeter road. It ran 200 meters from the base of the ridge to the edge of the outer colony fence. It was 3 meters deep at its deepest. It had a broken sensor relay, 2 non-functional automated turrets, and a reputation for being full of copper-colored mud that smelled like old coins and something that had been dead a long time. It was not a strategic position. It was barely a position at all. I know it, sir. Good. The colonel tapped the map with 2 fingers. Take it. Marcus waited for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. Sir, take it alone? The Vethkai are pushing from the eastern ridge. We have 4 confirmed assault vectors. Channels 7, 8, 9, and the primary colony road. Colonel Harris finally looked up. He had the eyes of a man who had stopped sleeping 2 nights ago and had made quiet, private peace with that fact. We're pulling every available unit to the primary road and perimeters 8 and 9. 7 is a drainage ditch. The enemy will not dedicate significant force to it. He looked back at the map. You will hold it until reinforcements arrive, or until they don't come. Marcus stood very still. The ditch, he said. The ditch. By myself. You'll have a standard supply crate. Field loadout. The colonel said the last part without any particular cruelty, without any hesitation, and that, the complete absence of hesitation, was somehow worse than anything deliberate would have been. He wasn't being dismissed. He was just being deprioritized. Filed under, not the thing that matters. The supply crate was already sitting outside the colonel's office door when Marcus walked out. Someone had put it there before the meeting. Before he had said yes, before he had even been asked. He stood looking at it for a moment. Then he picked it up. It was not heavy. The sun on Kepler 442b ran slightly too orange. It did this thing to the light that said warm afternoon in summer while the actual temperature made your knuckles ache if you stopped moving. Marcus carried the supply crate down the eastern service road, with his rifle slung across his back, and his boots already collecting the copper mud of the lowland where the drainage fields bled into the ground. He passed Private Chen near the vehicle depot. Chen looked at the crate, looked at the direction Marcus was walking, looked back at the crate. They giving you Channel 7? Chen said. Yup. Alone? Yup. Chen's mouth made a shape that lived exactly halfway between sympathy and a laugh. It didn't fully commit to either. Well, he said, stay low. Marcus kept walking. The ditch opened in front of him like a long scar cut into the red earth. From the ridge above, it probably looked like nothing. A geographical footnote, a drainage groove, a wrinkle in the ground that would appear on a satellite map as a thin line and nothing more. Up close, it was something different. Deep enough that standing at the bottom put the rim level with his shoulder. Wide enough for 2 men walking side by side. Long enough that you could not see from one end to the other without climbing out and looking. The walls were hard-packed clay beneath the copper mud. The bottom was wet, not flooded. The drainage system was still doing something, but wet enough that each step pulled at the sole of his boot with a slow sucking sound, like the ground was reluctant to let him go. He climbed down and walked the full length of it. The 2 broken turrets sat at the northern mouth, the end that faced the ridge. They were M7 automated perimeter defense units, squat and gray, low to the ground, built to rotate and fire on motion-detected targets. One had a cracked casing on the right side, where something had hit it hard. The other had simply stopped working at some point in the last year, and no one had come to find out why. He tried the power switches on both. Nothing from either of them. The sensor relay was a box on a post at the midpoint of the ditch. It had a yellow fault light on its front panel, blinking on and off with a slow rhythm of something that had been broken so long it had stopped caring about being broken. He opened the supply crate and looked at what he had. 300 rounds of standard .7.62 rifle ammunition, 4 fragmentation grenades, gray-cased, standard issue. 1 emergency medical kit. The small kind, the kind that said without saying anything, "We don't expect you to need much." 2 days of field ration packs. A short-range comm unit with a battery at 60%. And at the very bottom, under all of it, because someone had packed it as an afterthought, or a joke, or neither, a thermos of coffee, already cold. Marcus sat on the edge of the crate and drank the cold coffee and looked at his 200 meters of mud-walled ditch and thought. The Vethkai were going to come from the ridge. That was where they always came from, because the ridge gave them height and cover. And the long sight lines their formation tactics needed. They were going to come in their standard column formation. The Vethkai did everything in formation. It was the foundation of their whole military identity. And they were going to reach the northern mouth of Channel 7 and see 1 human cadet standing in a drainage ditch. And they were going to do whatever the Vethkai equivalent of a laugh was. And then they were going to walk straight through, unless he made that straight line into something else. He finished the coffee. He picked up his rifle. He looked at the ditch, not the way you look at a problem, the way you look at raw material. He spent the first hour taking the M7 turrets apart, not to fix them. He had enough field training to understand that the cracked casing on the first unit had sheared through the targeting processor. That was dead. That was gone. No amount of wanting would change it. The second had a fried power cell, which was also a dead end with no tools and no replacement units. But the motion detection sensors in both of them were separate from the main system. They ran on their own small internal battery, and they communicated on a short-range electromagnetic ping. They still worked. He used his field tool, the small flat-handled multi-use tool every cadet carried mostly for opening sealed ration packs, to pull the sensor cylinders free from both turrets. Each one was about the length of his hand, gray and cylindrical, with a range of 15 meters in a forward cone. When they detected movement, they sent a pulse. He had 2 sensors and nothing for them to trigger. He thought about that for a while. He thought about the 4 grenades sitting in the crate. He didn't decide anything yet. He just kept the problem running in the background and kept moving. The northern approach, where the Vethkai would enter, had a natural choke point about 60 meters in. The ditch walls came closest there, narrowing to roughly 2 meters of width before opening up again toward the southern exit near the colony fence. That narrowing was just geology. The clay formation did it naturally. It had never been designed as anything. But anyone moving through the ditch from north to south would have to pass through that gap in single file or near to it. Marcus looked at the narrowing for a long time. Then he climbed down to the waterline and started digging with the field tool and both hands. The clay was hard on the surface and softer an inch below, and the copper mud was everywhere within seconds, and his hands were brown to the wrists within the first 5 minutes, and new stains were appearing on his uniform to keep the old coffee stain company, and he didn't care. He kept digging. He was cutting shallow shelves into the ditch wall, low near the waterline, below where anyone walking through would naturally look. Each shelf was about 30 centimeters deep and 40 wide, big enough to hold things, stable enough to hold them without shifting. He made 3, 1 on each side at the narrowing, 1 just past it on the south side. He left them empty for the moment. He climbed out on the colony-facing southern side and looked at the ground level. Flatland running toward the outer fence 150 meters away. Scrub grass, a few low rock clusters. No cover worth the name, but no obstacles either. He walked north along the ridge-side rim of the ditch, staying as low as he could, studying the approach. The ridge was 400 meters out, maybe a little more. The trees there were gray-blue, with broad flat leaves that knocked against each other in the wind like ceramic plates being stacked. The Vethkai would stage inside that tree line. They would come out of the forest, cross 400 meters of open ground, reach the northern mouth of the ditch, and move through it heading south toward the colony fence. They would not expect anything waiting for them in the ditch. They would not expect 1 cadet, an unremarkable, coffee-stained, third-year cadet who had been assigned here because he was the most expendable person in the garrison, to have done anything useful with his afternoon. That gap, the space between what they expected and what could actually be true, that was the only weapon he had with any reach. He went back down into the ditch. By the 3rd hour, his knees hurt and his back was tightening up and the cold was getting into his fingers despite the work. He had stripped the communications cable from the broken sensor relay, gutted the box entirely without guilt, since it hadn't worked anyway, and used the thin wire to connect his first motion sensor to a small indicator light pulled from the relay circuit board. When the outer sensor triggered, the light blinked red. He ran the wire carefully along the base of the east wall, hiding it under a thin, pushed-over layer of mud. He fixed the sensor to face the northern mouth, aimed north, 15-meter range. Then he did the same with the second sensor at the narrowing point. wired to a different indicator light. This one green. Red light, something moving within 15 meters of the northern entrance. Green light, something inside the narrowing. 2 blinks. 2 pieces of information. That was all it was. But information in the dark was worth more than ammunition if you knew how to use it. He pressed both lights into the clay wall on the south side, near his fallback position, the farthest point from the northern entrance, where the shelves he dug were arranged around him like a crude workstation. Rifle magazines in order of reach, grenades, medical kit, the empty thermos. He ate 1 ration pack at the 4-hour mark. It tasted like salted cardboard. He ate every crumb. He looked at the 4 grenades for a long time. The shelves he had carved near the choke point, he had an idea about those. But the grenades needed the right moment and the right positioning, and committing them too early was the same as wasting them. He forced himself to wait. Not because he felt calm about waiting, because it was the smartest thing his 2 hands could do right now. The sun finished dropping behind the ridge. The sky went purple, then a deep bruised gray, then the specific kind of dark that came from a moonless night on this planet. Not total blackness, but something thin and cold, starlight from the wrong angles, light that illuminated nothing clearly. Marcus cracked a glow patch from the medical kit. Just barely. Just enough to give the faintest orange bleed without throwing visible light beyond the ditch walls. Enough to see his 2 indicator lights. He pressed his back against the clay. Both lights were dark. He sat and did not move and did not think about anything except the 2 lights and what would happen when they changed. Sometime after full dark, he had stopped tracking exact time because time tracking made the waiting worse. He heard it, not from inside the ditch, from above it, from the direction of the ridge. Sound traveled strangely in Kepler 442b's atmosphere, stretched slightly, like a voice coming through a wall from the next room. What he was hearing was the Vethkai moving into staging positions, the low harmonic hum of their field communication units, the faint repeated clicking of their armor plates adjusting and locking as they moved. They sounded like machinery that had learned to breathe. They were not trying to be quiet about it. There was no reason for them to be. This was a drainage ditch. 1 human cadet, a footnote in their assault plan. The kind of position you cleared between the real objectives, almost as an afterthought, the way you close a door behind you when leaving a room. The red light blinked. Marcus put the thermos down against the clay wall. Carefully, no sound. He lifted his rifle with both hands and settled into the firing position he had decided on 4 hours ago, back low against the southern wall, angle covering the northern approach, the choke point between him and whatever was coming. The red light blinked again and again. Steady now. Whatever was out there had passed the 15-meter mark and kept moving. Marcus took 1 breath, held the second one. The Vethkai were in his ditch. There were 3 of them. Scout unit. Marcus could tell by the spacing of the sounds. The soft displacement of mud, 3 distinct rhythms, staggered as they moved. Vethkai scouts moved in a triangle pattern, the lead unit 2 steps ahead, the other 2 flanking slightly behind and wide. He had read about it in the tactical manual. The manual had made it sound almost elegant. In the dark of a narrow ditch, 3 meters below ground level, with copper mud sucking at every step, it sounded like nothing elegant at all. He did not fire, he let them come. The green light blinked. They were in the choke point. Still Marcus didn't move. He kept his back flat against the south wall, his rifle ready but aimed at nothing yet. And he breathed shallow and slow and watched the darkness of the ditch resolve slowly into shapes as his eyes found the faint edge of starlight above the rim. The first shape came through the narrowing upright and unhurried. Taller than a man by half a head, broader through the chest, wearing Vethkai field armor that caught no light because it had been designed to catch no light. Behind it, the second shape. Behind that, the third. They stopped. The lead scout stood in the middle of the ditch, a few meters south of the narrowing, and looked around. Marcus could hear the soft scanning pulse of a Vethkai sensor unit built into the scout's helmet, a low tick-tick-tick that swept and returned, mapping the space, finding the broken turrets, finding the stripped relay post, finding nothing threatening. One of them made a sound, low, almost subsonic, the particular Vethkai tonal frequency that military linguists had spent years categorizing. Marcus had heard recordings of it in his second-year field communications course. The instructor had translated the frequency band as indicating something between dismissal and of expected condition in human language, as we thought. Nothing here. The lead scout began moving south again. Marcus let them reach the southern exit. Let them climb up and out of the ditch onto the flat ground between the channel and the colony fence. He heard them moving. 3 sets of footsteps on harder ground, heading toward the fence for a close-range assessment. He pressed himself flatter against the wall and didn't breathe loud. They did their sweep, 5 minutes, maybe 6. Then they came back, dropping back down into the ditch's southern end, moving north toward the ridge to report. 3 shapes passing him in the near dark, 2 meters away, so close he could hear the micro-adjustments of their armor servos. They passed him. They reached the choke point. They went through it. The red light blinked, then dark, then dark. They were past the outer sensor. Back in the open approach. Heading home to tell the main force that Channel 7 was clear. Marcus released the breath he had been holding for the last 90 seconds. He looked at his 2 lights sitting in the clay. He looked at the choke point. He looked at the 3 shelf notches he had carved near it. He had maybe 2 hours before the main force came. He started working. The idea he had been turning over since the afternoon was this. The choke point was the only place in the ditch where the enemy had to compress, where a formation became a single file, where the advantages of numbers and spacing that the Vethkai relied on went temporarily small. 2 meters wide, that was the narrowing, 2 meters. He positioned the first grenade in the left side shelf at the narrowing. He did not pull the pin. He wired the pin to a thin length of stripped cable, running the cable along the bottom of the wall to his position at the south end. When he pulled the cable, the pin would pull. He had 4 seconds after that, standard fuse on field grenades, before it went. He did the second grenade the same way on the right side shelf, 2 separate cables, 2 separate triggers, both held in his left hand. He positioned the third grenade in the shelf just past the choke point on the south side, angled back toward the narrowing. Same wire setup, third cable. He held the fourth grenade in reserve and put it in his chest pocket. He sat back and looked at his 3 cables and thought through the sequence. Enemy enters ditch from north. Red light. He waits. They reach the choke point. Green light. He waits a beat, lets the front units clear the narrowing and move south toward him while the following units are still inside it. He pulls cable 1 and 2 simultaneously. Both grenades in the choke point walls go at once. The blast in a 3-meter deep, 2-meter wide clay channel is not the same as a blast in open air. It is a different kind of event entirely. He had read about this in a history file actually, not a military manual. A history file about a battle in a river trench on a different colony, 130 years ago, before anyone had even heard of the Vethkai, when 2 human factions had fought each other over a water source. Someone had used channel grenades. The after-action notes described the results in the flat, careful language of military reports. And even in that careful language, the results had been ugly. The clay walls would direct the blast inward, concussive force with no room to spread. Then he would fire at whatever came through toward him. Then cable 3. The grenade passed the choke point, aimed backward, for whatever turned and tried to retreat. Then the 4th grenade by hand if it came to that. Then the rifle until the magazines were empty. He sat with this plan for a long time and let himself feel how thin it was. How many things had to go exactly right. How many variables were outside his control. Then he put that feeling down, the way you put down something heavy when you need your hands free. And he looked at his lights and he waited. The first hour of waiting was the hardest. His mind did what minds do in darkness when there is nothing to occupy them. It went looking for things to be afraid of, and it was very thorough about it. It found the question of whether the main force would send 10 units or 30. It found the question of what happened if a Vethkai commander decided, on instinct or caution, to approach Channel 7 from the south instead of the north. It found the question of whether the grenade wires would hold, whether the fuses would perform as expected, whether his hands would shake at the wrong moment. He let all of it move through him and kept his hands still. The second hour was easier. He had slipped into that particular state that soldiers and surgeons, and anyone who has ever sat waiting in the dark long enough eventually find. A kind of hollow readiness. All noise inside quieted down to a single point of attention. Not calm, not brave, just present. He ate the second half of his ration pack. He thought about getting up and stretching his knees, which were screaming at him. He decided the mud sounds of movement weren't worth the relief. He looked at the 2 lights. He looked at them until they were the whole world. Midway through the 3rd hour, sounds drifted over from the west, muffled, distant. The percussion of weapons fire, not at Channel 7, but at Perimeter 8. The main assault was beginning somewhere. The garrison was engaging the primary force vectors, which meant the secondary forces were beginning their approach too. Marcus pressed his back flat. The red light blinked. Not a scout rhythm this time, faster, more weight behind the mud sounds from the north. More steps, more mass, a crowd of sound where 3 individuals had been before. He tightened his grip on the 3 cables. The red light blinked and blinked and blinked. Steady now. A continuous signal. Multiple contact points moving inside the sensor range simultaneously. He counted heartbeats. 12, 15. The sounds reached the choke point. The green light blinked on and stayed on. Marcus waited one more full breath. The front units clearing the narrowing. The following press behind them still inside it. And then he pulled both cables, left hand, one sharp tug on each at the same time. He had time to press himself flat and cover his ears before the world inside the ditch became noise. The two grenades went within a fraction of a second of each other, and the sound they made in the enclosed clay channel was not the flat crack of an open field detonation. It was a compression, a hard, massive push of air that hit Marcus in the chest like a shove even from his position 20 meters south. Dirt and clay fragments rained on him. The walls of the ditch absorbed the blast and threw it back inward, and the sound was enormous and then suddenly gone, replaced by a ringing silence and then screaming. Vethkai didn't scream in frequencies humans could easily hear, but at high physiological distress the low harmonic of their vocalizations spiked upward, and what filled the ditch was a high-pitched, overlapping layered sound that Marcus had no language for, except that it was awful. He was already up and firing. The units that had come through the choke point before the blast, 2, maybe 3, were disoriented. In the ditch ahead of him, Shape stumbled. His rifle was on semi-automatic and he fired controlled pairs, the way he had trained, the way that felt almost mechanical now. 1-2, shift, 1-2, shift. The first Shape dropped. The second took a hit and moved sideways into the wall. He fired again. Behind him, nothing. They had come in from the north, and his cable 3 was for the ones who turned back. He heard movement in the choke point, something trying to push through the aftermath of the blast. He pulled cable 3. The third grenade sent its force northward, through the narrowing, and the sounds from the choke point stopped. Then there was a long moment of near silence broken only by the ringing in Marcus's ears and the distant thud of the battle at perimeter 8. He counted to 5. He moved north carefully, stepping around the shapes in the mud, keeping his rifle ready. The 2 units he had dropped in the south end of the ditch were down and not moving. At the choke point, the blast damage was significant. The clay walls had fractured and partially collapsed. 3 more Vethkai were down in the narrowing and just past it. He counted 5. He moved to the north of the choke point and looked at the approach. Empty. The red light was dark. Whatever had come in had either been in the ditch or had pulled back to the ridge when the grenades went. He stood still for a moment in the ruined choke point with his rifle and the smell of clay and burnt metal and listened. Across the comm unit, voices were clipping in and out. The garrison's main command channels were saturated. Everyone talking at once, the sounds of the primary engagement bleeding through as static and fragments of sentences. He caught perimeter 8 holding and 9 taking pressure and nothing else that was coherent. No one called his channel. No one checked on the ditch. He went back to his position at the south end and sat down. His hands were shaking. Not wildly, not a collapse, but the particular vibration that came when the body understood what had just been asked of it and was filing a formal complaint. He let them shake. He reloaded the rifle. He pressed his back to the clay. He had 300 rounds minus what he had fired, maybe 260 left. He had 1 grenade in his chest pocket. He had no more wires and no more shelved grenades. Whatever came next would be direct. The red light was dark. He looked at it and waited for it to change. Somewhere north of the ridge, the Vethkai scouts had reported back, and now the unit commander was reading their report. And the report said, Channel 7 was clear scouted, confirmed, no threats. And then immediately after that, the reports from the assault units said 5 soldiers were down in the channel and the approach was contested. Marcus sat in the mud and thought about what a Vethkai commander would do with that information. He thought, they're going to send more, he thought. They're going to send a lot more. He looked at the dark red light. He looked at the single grenade in his pocket. He picked up the cold, empty thermos from where it sat against the wall and looked at it for no reason he could name. Just holding it, just having something to hold. Then he put it back down. He straightened his grip on the rifle. He waited. The Vethkai commander's name was something that had no human pronunciation, and the humans in the garrison had designated the commander, based on intercepted communication signatures, only as Ridge 7 Actual. Ridge 7 Actual had a problem. The problem was not that 5 soldiers were down in a drainage ditch. 5 soldiers was within the acceptable range of a contested approach. Problems arose. Obstacles were removed. This was the ordinary arithmetic of an assault in progress. The problem was the report itself. The scouts had cleared Channel 7, confirmed no threats, confirmed single human presence, no fortifications, non-functional defensive units, and then 5 soldiers had gone into that confirmed clear channel and not come out. That was not an obstacle. That was a contradiction. And the Vethkai, who built their military doctrine on the near-religious authority of confirmed intelligence, found contradictions deeply, fundamentally offensive. Ridge 7 Actual sent 12 soldiers into Channel 7. This was not a small number. This was a correction, a sharp, hard correction sent to fix a problem that should not have existed. Marcus saw the red light blink on and stay on long before he heard them. He counted the weight of the sounds as they moved through the northern approach. More feet in the mud, more mass. The The sounds of units moving in coordinated spacing, the Vethkai way, the way they moved everywhere always. Tight, controlled, professional. He had 258 rounds and 1 grenade and a drainage ditch. He did not move from his position at the south end. He let them come to the choke point. The choke point was damaged from the earlier blast. The walls had partially collapsed on both sides, narrowing the space further. Instead of 2 meters wide, it was now barely wide enough for one person at a time, maybe 1.5 meters through the rubble. The blast debris was still in the channel, clay chunks, loose soil, pieces of what had been the wall. He had not planned that. It had just happened. He spent a moment appreciating it. Then the green light blinked on and he started shooting. The thing about shooting inside a deep clay ditch at night was that the muzzle flash of the rifle turned the world on and off, strobe lighting the channel in half-second bursts of white. In those bursts Marcus could see. Between them he was blind. He made himself shoot in controlled pairs and pause. Shoot and see. Pause and listen. Shoot and see. The first unit through the choke point went down before it reached him. The second took his fire and pushed through it, hit somewhere non-vital, still coming, and Marcus sidestepped and put 2 more rounds in before it reached him. 6 feet away, 3 feet, then down. Too close. He felt the wind of it. Behind the choke point, the others were pressing. The narrow gap was creating exactly the compression he had wanted, but now he had no grenades wired into the walls to take advantage of it, and they were working through the obstruction steadily. The Vethkai discipline holding even in a dark rubble-filled ditch with the sounds of the dead around them. He pulled back south, firing as he moved, not sprinting. There was no room to sprint. The mud took your footing if you tried, but moving backward in measured steps, putting distance between himself and the choke point, buying angle and time. 2 more units pushed through. He hit the first. The second got through uninjured. Then it was inside the south section with him. It was fast. That was the thing about the Vethkai. Everything they did was fast and very sure. It came at him in the dark between his muzzle flashes, and he had just enough of a burst of light to see it closing. And he threw himself sideways into the clay wall, and it hit the space where he had been, and its elbow hit the wall instead of him. And in the second it took to reorient, he fired twice from point-blank range, and it dropped. He landed in the mud, got up, kept moving south, the southern exit, the open ground between the channel and the colony fence. He didn't want to leave the ditch. Leaving the ditch meant open ground. Open ground meant no walls around him, no compression of enemy movement, no terrain working for him. But staying in the ditch with 8 or 9 Vethkai between him and the only defensible geometry he had was a shorter way to end up dead. He went up the south wall, scrambling fingers in the clay, rifle banging against his hip, and came out on flat ground under the thin star-spattered sky. He ran, not far, 40 meters, to the nearest cluster of rocks he had noted that afternoon. Low, 1/2 meter high, not real cover, but the best available cover. And he dropped behind them and pressed flat and pointed the rifle back at the ditch's southern exit. He breathed. He waited. The first shape came out of the ditch 6 seconds later. He shot it. The second came up 5 meters west of the first. He shot it. There was a pause, 15 seconds of nothing from the ditch exit. Marcus lay in the thin grass behind his rocks and felt his heart slamming itself against his ribs like it was trying to get out. And he forced his breathing to slow, and he kept the rifle on the ditch rim. The Vethkai were very smart. He knew this. He was not operating under any illusions. They were smart and disciplined, and there were 12 of them. And there was one of him. And they were going to figure out where he was within a few moments, at which point 2 of them would hold the ditch exit, and the rest would flank left and right on the surface, and he would be caught in the open with no walls to save him. He had maybe 30 seconds before that started happening. He pulled the last grenade from his chest pocket. He looked at the ditch exit. He pulled the pin. He held the grenade for 2 seconds, counting, watching the exit, and then he threw it hard and flat into the southern end of the ditch, into the open channel below, and pressed himself flat against the rock. The grenade went off inside the channel, the compression effect again. That hard-contained push, dirt raining outward, then silence from the ditch. Then one shape appeared at the rim, moving fast, and Marcus fired once and it dropped. Then nothing, long nothing. He lay still and didn't move and watched the ditch exit and listened. After what felt like a long time but was probably 90 seconds, the comm unit on his belt buzzed with a fragment of signal. Not a voice, just a carrier ping, the garrison's automatic position signal pinging all active field units. He pressed the transmit button twice in response. Alive. Here no answer came back. Too much traffic on the main channels. He lay behind his rocks in the thin starlight and did the math. He had fired. He counted in his head, tracking by magazine, approximately 80 rounds. He had 200 rounds remaining across his magazines. He had no grenades. He had no wires and no sensors and no tricks left in the bag except himself and the rifle and whatever terrain he could find. He had been out of the ditch for less than 5 minutes, and already he hated the open ground. The ditch had been his. He understood it. He had prepared it. Out here, he was just a man in the dark with a rifle and some rocks. He needed to get back in. He waited for 2 full minutes, counting seconds, forcing himself to count, because it kept his mind anchored to something. And then he moved in a low crawl back toward the ditch, angling to the eastern side of the exit, approaching from a different angle than he had left. He looked over the rim. The south section was empty. The shapes that come through the choke point were down, some at the blast site, some further south. Nothing was moving. He dropped back in. His boots hit the mud, and he moved north immediately, carefully, clearing each section before moving to the next. At the choke point, more shapes down in the rubble. He counted. 6 down in the channel itself between north and south, plus 3 he had taken on the surface. That was 9. 12 had come in, 3 unaccounted for. He stopped moving. He held his breath and listened. Somewhere north of the choke point, in the northern approach, between the narrowing and the ditch entrance, something was still in the ditch. 3 of them. They had not pushed through. They had stopped, waiting for him to come north. Marcus stood very still in the mud and looked north into the darkness, and thought about 3 trained Vethkai soldiers, sitting in a narrow trench, pointing their weapons at the choke point, waiting for a human to walk into their sight line. He thought about this for a long time. Then he looked at the fractured wall of the choke point, specifically at the section that had collapsed inward, where the clay had given way and piled into the channel floor. The collapsed section had created something he hadn't had before, a rough, uneven step in the wall, a series of clay ledges leading upward. Not a ladder, not even close to a ladder, but a way out if you were willing to use your knees badly. He climbed. He came out of the ditch on the eastern rim, the ridge-facing side, and moved on hands and knees through the scrub grass in the dark, going north along the outside of the channel. He moved slowly, slower than he wanted to. The Vethkai had hearing that picked up soil compression at short range, and the scrub grass was brittle and would crackle if he moved fast. He counted his steps, 30 north along the outside. He was past the choke point now, close to the northern mouth. Somewhere below him, 3 Vethkai were pointing their weapons south at a gap they were certain he would come through. He looked over the rim, 2 shapes directly below. One slightly further south. He had been in the prone position with the rifle for so long his right shoulder was numb. He ignored that. He took the 2 closest shapes in quick succession from above. The angle was terrible, too steep, but they were not looking up. No one expects fire from directly above. It is not a thing military doctrine accounts for cleanly, and then rolled sideways before the third could reorient. The third one came out of the ditch fast, smarter than the others. It came up on the north side of the rim and it moved. Marcus was already on his feet. They were 5 meters apart on the open ground north of the channel, with the ridge behind the Vethkai and the colony behind Marcus, and both of them in the thin starlight with weapons raised. This was the kind of moment that combat training covered in exactly 0 realistic detail. Marcus fired first. The Vethkai fired at the same time. The Vethkai shot went wide left, possibly because Marcus's shot had not missed, and the enemy unit's aim had shifted in that half-second of body reaction. Marcus stood in the dark and looked at the shape on the ground in front of him and listened. Quiet from the ditch, quiet from the ridge. Distant sounds of the main battle from the west, still going, still ongoing, still far away. He looked at his hands. The shaking was worse now. He pressed them against his thighs until it passed. He went back into the ditch. He sat at the south end back against the clay, and he counted his remaining ammunition. 160 rounds, no grenades. He looked at his 2 indicator lights. The wires had been damaged in the blast. The green light at the choke point was dark and not responding, but the red outer sensor was still live, still blinking softly with its tiny heartbeat pulse. He was still here. He was still in the ditch. He set his jaw and looked at the dark red light and waited for whatever was coming next. He didn't have to wait long. 40 minutes after the second engagement, the comm unit buzzed. This time a voice broke through, clipped, static-wrapped, but recognizable as human. All field units, primary road holding. Perimeter 8 holding. 9 has breach point containing report status. Marcus pressed transmit channel 7, 1 soldier, holding. A pause. The channel crackled. Say again 7. Holding, Marcus said. Channel 7 is holding. Another pause, longer this time, as if the person on the other end of the comm was doing their own math. 1 soldier. Channel 7, holding, copy. 7, reinforcement is not repeat, not available at this time. Hold as long as possible. Marcus looked at 160 rounds of ammunition. He looked at his empty thermos. He looked at the red light. Copy, he said. He set the comm down. He thought about the word possible. It was 3 in the morning by the internal clock on his comm unit when the red light blinked on again. Not fast this time. Not the frantic pulse of a large force. A slow, measured rhythm. Spaced. Deliberate. Scouts again, clearing the approach before the main force. Making sure this time, Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened them and started thinking. He had no grenades. He had 160 rounds and 2 walls of clay and 200 meters of trench and a broken thermos and whatever was in his head. The Vethkai were about to send everything they had at Channel 7. Not because it mattered strategically, because now it was personal. He looked at the red light. He thought, good, he thought. Let them come thinking this is a mop-up. He picked up the rifle. He began to move. The scouts found nothing. That was the point. Marcus was not in the south end when they swept through. He was not in the choke point. He was not behind the rock cluster on the surface where he had sheltered earlier. When the 3 scouts moved through Channel 7 from north to south and climbed out the far end to sweep the open ground toward the fence, they found an empty ditch, disturbed mud, blast debris, and the bodies of the soldiers from the previous 2 engagements. They did not find Marcus. He was above them. He had spent the 40 minutes between the second engagement and the arrival of the scouts doing something that seemed borderline insane but was. When he ran through the available options, the least insane thing left. He had climbed out of the ditch on the ridgeside rim and crawled north through the scrub grass to a position just beside the northern mouth, the entrance, the point where the Vethkai were coming in from. He had found a low depression in the ground, a natural fold in the earth at the very lip of the channel, and he had pressed himself into it face down. And he had covered himself in copper mud, pulling handfuls of it from the ditch rim and pressing it onto his arms and the back of his neck and his hair. He smelled terrible. He lay completely still. The scouts had come down the slope from the ridge and entered the ditch 2 meters from his head. He had heard their breathing, that low, almost subsonic in-out of Vethkai respiration, so different from human breathing that it took new soldiers a long time to identify it as breathing at all. He had heard the soft clicking of their armor. One of them had stepped within arm's reach of where he was lying. None of them looked at a muddy depression by the ditch entrance that smelled like copper and death. They went south. They confirmed the ditch was empty. They climbed out and swept the open ground and found nothing. They went back north. They passed Marcus again. He watched them go through the thin gap between his folded arms, his face 2 inches from the ground. He gave them 5 minutes to reach the tree line. Then he climbed back into the ditch and moved to a new position. He chose the midpoint. Just north of the choke point, the section of ditch between the narrowing and the northern mouth. This was not the section he had prepared. This had none of his carefully dug shelves or wired sensors. But the choke point was now behind him, and anything coming through from the north would have to pass his position first. The approach was on his terms now, and his terms were close range, no warning, full surprise for as many seconds as he could make that last. He cut fresh footholds into the east wall, shallow cuts, just deep enough for his boots. He could get up and out of the ditch in 4 seconds from this position. He tested it twice, slowly, making sure his footing was solid. He checked his ammunition again, obsessively. 160 rounds, 1 full magazine in the rifle, 4 in his vest. He looked north at the ditch entrance framed by the star-spattered sky above the rim. At 3:47 in the morning, the Vethkai came in force. There were 20 of them, maybe more. He could hear the mass of their approach before he saw the first shapes at the entrance. The collective weight of 20 armored soldiers moving through the clay ditch was a thing you felt in the ground before you heard it with your ears. A low rhythmic tremor, coming steady and fast. They were not going carefully this time. The scouts had confirmed empty. The commander had sent a force large enough to overwhelm anything they might have missed. This was by Vethkai doctrine, a mopping up operation. Fast entry, fast sweep, fast exit. The first 3 units came into the ditch entrance upright and moving. Marcus was 8 meters south of the entrance, pressed against the east wall, still caked in copper mud, and he shot the front unit twice and the second unit once and moved. The Vethkai military response to unexpected contact in a confined space was immediate and practiced. Forward units pressed, rear units spread to the walls, support units aimed at the direction of fire. It was a good response. It was the right response. It was designed for a shooter in a fixed position. Marcus was not in a fixed position. He was running south along the east wall, not sprinting. The mud made a full sprint impossible, but moving fast, fast enough, and he was firing as he ran, half-turned, rifle against his side, not aimed shots, suppression, noise, and flash in a tight dark channel. He was not trying to hit anything in particular. He was trying to make the air in front of him hostile. He reached the choke point and went through it sideways. The collapsed walls had narrowed it to a squeeze, and once through he turned fully and fired at the narrowing. The front units of the Vethkai force had been pushing south after him, and the leading ones hit the choke point obstruction and slowed, and Marcus shot 2 of them in the gap, and the bodies added to the debris, and the choke point went from navigable to nearly blocked. He backed to the south end of the ditch. He listened to the sounds from the choke point. Vethkai were working through it. They were pulling at the rubble. They were disciplined, and they were not panicking, and they would clear it. It was a matter of time. He looked at the south exit of the ditch. He looked at the colony fence 150 meters away. He had a decision to make and almost no time to make it. If he climbed out to the south and crossed the open ground to the colony, he lived, probably, until the Vethkai followed him onto the open ground, which they would, and then it was a chase in the dark with no walls and no terrain and a single rifle. If he stayed in the ditch, he had the terrain and no room to run. He heard rubble shifting at the choke point. He stayed in the ditch. He did something that was not in any manual he had ever read. He went back north. Not through the choke point, through the wall. The choke point's blast damage had fractured both walls, and where the clay had collapsed, it had also created a rough bypass, a scramble route along the east wall's rubble pile that went above the narrowest point and back down the other side, outside the choke point geometry. You couldn't stand on it. You could belly crawl along it if you were willing to have clay shards in your face. He belly crawled along it. He came down behind the leading Vethkai units who were working on the choke point debris from the south side. He was behind them now. They were facing south, working to clear a path south, expecting the human to be south. He fired at their backs from 8 meters away. The next 4 seconds were the purest version of chaos Marcus had ever been inside of. The Vethkai force reacted with immediate speed. They turned, they spread, they brought weapons up. But they were turning from a direction they had just come from, in a ditch, in the dark, with the rubble of the choke point on one side, and an enemy who was now south of them and north of them simultaneously in their immediate tactical understanding. That half-second of reorientation was expensive. Marcus fired everything in his current magazine, changed, fired the next one, moved again, not north this time, east, up the footholds he had cut into the wall earlier, coming out on the surface on the ridge side in one fast scramble, dropping flat immediately. He lay above the ditch in the thin starlight with the sound of the fight inside the channel below him. Vethkai were moving in the ditch. He could hear them, the clicking armor, the near subsonic communication tones, the deliberate controlled movement of a force that had been surprised and was reorganizing. They were very good. They would have a new plan in moments. He put his rifle over the rim and fired south along the ditch from above. Like the unit he had flanked this way earlier, the ones inside the ditch were not looking up. The angle was terrible for accuracy. He wasn't trying for accuracy. He was trying to make every direction inside the channel feel dangerous. He moved west along the surface rim, 10 meters, and fired down again from a new angle. Moved east, 15 meters, and fired down again. He was one person. He was making himself feel like many people. He ran out of his third magazine. He changed it, fingers clumsy now with cold and fatigue, dropping the empty magazine in the mud. He pressed himself flat and breathed. His left arm was hurting in a dull way that he identified as a hit. At some point in the chaos inside the ditch, something had connected. Not a full round, a fragment maybe, or a glancing edge. His sleeve was wet. He pulled the sleeve back in the dark and felt the wound by touch. A gash, not a puncture. Bleeding steadily, but not in the way that meant anything urgent yet. He reached into his vest pocket, found the medical kit by feel, pulled compression bandage free, and wrapped his arm one-handed by pressing one end under his knee and pulling with his teeth. It was an ugly dressing. It held. He lay on the surface above the ditch and listened to the sounds from inside it. Fewer sounds now. Movement, but less of it. Communication tones, but quieter. He looked at his comm unit, 4:22 in the morning. Dawn on Kepler 42b came around 5:30. Approximately, he had one full magazine, 2 partial ones, approximately 80 rounds total. He lay above the ditch with 80 rounds and a bandaged arm and thought about the next hour. The Vethkai inside the ditch would wait him out if they thought he was pinned. They were logical about resource expenditure. They would secure the channel, establish a position, and wait for daylight when they could see him clearly. He could not let them secure the channel. He had to keep making the channel feel contested, moving, unpredictable, loud. The problem was that moving and making noise and firing used ammunition, and he had 80 rounds and no way to get more. He thought about the 2 broken M7 turrets at the northern mouth. He thought about them very carefully. The casings were cracked and the processors and power cells were gone, stripped when he'd pulled the sensors. But the chassis were still there. Big gray angular boxes mounted on stubby rotation arms. In daylight obviously broken. In starlight at a distance. Shapes. Angular metal shapes at the ditch entrance. He had an idea that was somewhere past desperate and into its own separate territory. He moved north along the surface, belly crawl, slow and silent, toward the northern mouth of the ditch. The M7 chassis weighed about 20 kilograms each. He knew this because when he got back into the ditch via the north entrance, coming in before the bulk of the remaining Vethkai force, who were in the center and south sections. He had to move them. Not far. He dragged them south from their original positions, one at a time, 12 meters each, leaving long grooves in the mud. His arm screamed. He dragged them anyway. He positioned them side by side, blocking the south side of the choke point rubble. They filled roughly half the width of the post-blast ditch. Not a real barrier, a suggestion of a barrier. In the dark, from the south side looking north, they looked like two machine gun platforms dug into a defensive position. He positioned himself behind them, flat, rifle through the gap. He aimed at the choke point. He waited. When the first Vethkai shape tried to push through the rubble from the north side, testing the choke point, looking for the clear path, he fired once. The shape pulled back, a pause. Communication tones from the north section low and rapid. A discussion, then nothing. Marcus lay behind two broken, empty, useless machine gun casings and held his breath. He thought about what it looked like from the north side, a defended position, two heavy weapons platforms. A shooter behind them in a blocked choke point who had already taken down 17 or more of their soldiers in the last 3 hours using terrain and darkness, and whatever else he had found. He thought about what the Vethkai commander was thinking right now. The commander did not know there was one human in the ditch. The scouts had confirmed no fixed fortifications, but fixed fortifications had appeared. The force had taken significant casualties in what was supposed to be a cleared drainage channel. The channel had demonstrated grenades, automatic fire, flanking fire from above, and some form of sensor capability. The commander was looking at an intel report that said, empty ditch, and a casualty report that said 17 soldiers. That gap again. The gap between expected and actual. Marcus pressed his forehead against the top of the M7 chassis and felt the cold metal and breathed. He heard the Vethkai pull back north, back toward the entrance, back up the approach toward the ridge. Not retreating, reorganizing, calling for support. Calling for the kind of support you called when an empty ditch turned out to be something else. Marcus looked at his comm unit, 4:51 in the morning, less than 40 minutes to dawn. He had a partial magazine in the dark. He needed both of them to last. He lay behind his empty turrets in the mud and the cold and the dark, and he looked at the northern mouth of the ditch and he waited for what was coming. The Vethkai brought a barrier unit. Marcus didn't know the human military designation for it. He knew what it was by sound. The deep, slow pulse of a heavy field projector being positioned somewhere on the ridge slope, outside the channel, beyond the 400-meter open approach. The pulse had a physical weight, a subsonic pressure you felt in the chest before your ears caught up to it. A barrier unit was a siege weapon. It was what you brought when you needed to clear a fixed position without sending infantry into a choke point. It projected a wide-angle electromagnetic pulse that disrupted all small electronics, shattered sensor equipment, and knocked out comm units inside its effective radius. It did not kill by itself. It blinded, and then you sent infantry into the blind. Marcus felt his comm unit die. The screen went black. The carrier signal vanished. No more garrison voices, no more carrier pings. Just silence from the small rectangle on his belt. He looked at his indicator lights. The red outer sensor light was dark, dead. He was alone in the ditch with no sensors and no communication and no way to know what was coming until it was already at the entrance. He had 41 rounds left. He looked at the northern mouth of the ditch, open, dark, just the rough rectangle of the entrance with the star-spattered sky above the rim, and the long slope of the approach vanishing into darkness beyond it. He thought about what 41 rounds meant against whatever the Vethkai were about to send. He thought about it very clearly and honestly, the way you think about a thing when there is no point in being soft about it. Then he stopped thinking about it, because it wasn't a useful thing to spend his last minutes doing. He made himself eat. He had one ration pack left. He opened it and ate it in the dark behind the two empty turret casings, and it tasted exactly as bad as the first one had. And he ate every scrap of it, because his body was burning everything it had and would need whatever he put in. He flexed his left hand. The bandaged arm was stiff and the gash had stopped bleeding, but the whole limb felt wrong, thick and slow. He could still grip. He tested the grip on the rifle 3 times. Still functional. He looked at the entrance, he thought. 41 rounds, 1 ditch, 1 hour to dawn, he thought. Make it expensive, that was the whole plan. Everything had been in service of that. Make Channel 7 expensive. Make it cost more to go through than to go around. Make the Vethkai spend soldiers and time on a drainage ditch, until those soldiers and that time became a thing their assault plan couldn't absorb. He had not won anything. He had not stopped anything. He had been a stone in a boot for 7 hours. He intended to keep being a stone for 1 more hour. He pressed his back flat against the M7 chassis and pointed his rifle at the entrance. He waited. They came at 5 in the morning and they came differently. No column, no formation sweep. They came spread wide along the ridge-facing rim of the ditch, multiple positions, dropping in at staggered points along the north section, instead of funneling through the entrance. 3 points of entry simultaneously, the mouth, and 2 points where they had cut down through the rim walls on either side. Good thinking. It was genuinely good thinking. It eliminated the choke point as a defensive feature entirely. Marcus was firing before the first shape hit the mud. He had given up on the position behind the turret casings the moment he heard them on the rim. He was moving, staying low, angled toward the east wall, and he shot the first shape through the entrance and then the first shape through the eastern rim breach, and then he was running south again. Moving, always moving, never where he had been for more than 3 seconds. He had 31 rounds by the time he reached the south end. He climbed out. Open ground. Colony fence 150 meters ahead. Thin star-fading sky. The sky was changing. He noticed this through everything else. The absolute black was softening toward the deep blue of coming dawn at the highest point of the sky. A thin line of something not quite dark at the eastern horizon. He turned and fired back into the ditch entrance as the shapes came up out of it. 3 rounds, 2 hits, 1 miss, 28 rounds. He moved toward the rocks and fired from there. A Vethkai round hit the rock cluster and sent a chip of stone into his right cheek, a sharp, bright pain, and he dropped below the rock and put his hand to his face and looked at his fingers. Blood. Not bad. He wiped it on his uniform. The coffee stain had a lot of company now, and came up firing again. Shapes were spreading from the ditch exit, moving onto the open ground, fanning out, flanking left and right, the basic geometry of a clearing operation on open terrain against one target. He had no walls. He had no tricks left. He had 24 rounds and 100 meters of open ground between him and the colony fence. He ran. He ran and fired backward and ran and fired, and the rounds were going very fast now, each one a subtraction from a small total, and the Vethkai were coming onto the open ground behind him and firing, and the rounds going past him made sounds he had heard in training recordings but never expected to hear at this volume and this proximity. He reached the colony fence. He threw himself flat against the base of it. He had 11 rounds. He looked back at the shapes on the open ground. 7, 8, moving toward him in a spread fan. He fired carefully. No more suppression, no more noise and flash. Aimed shots, the kind his training had been building toward since his first year. The kind he had been lazy about in training because training felt distant and optional. He hit 4. He had 3 rounds. He looked at 3 rounds. He looked at 4 Vethkai on the open ground 50 meters away. He thought, stone in the boot. 1 more minute he fired the remaining 3 rounds one at a time, taking 3 of the 4. And then the rifle was empty and he had the empty rifle, and nothing else, and 1 Vethkai at 30 meters crossing toward him. He stood up. He put his back against the fence. He held the rifle by the barrel like a club. He was not thinking anymore. He was past thinking. He had used everything his mind had and everything his body had, and he was standing at the colony fence at 5:14 in the morning with an empty rifle and a coffee-stained uniform and copper mud in his hair. And the last Vethkai soldier came toward him in the thin pre-dawn light, and Marcus Webb held his ground. He held his ground. The sound came from above and behind him, through the colony fence, from the colony side, a high sharp crack and then a series of them, and the last Vethkai soldier stopped moving. Then it went down. Marcus stood at the fence and stared at it. Behind the fence on the colony side, boots on hard ground, running. Then a section of the fence burst open. An emergency gate, the kind built into the perimeter for exactly this kind of breach scenario. And 3 garrison soldiers came through at a run with weapons up. Behind them, Private Chen. Chen took one look at Marcus. The mud, the blood on his face, the bandaged arm, the empty rifle held like a bat, and did the same thing he had done that morning at the vehicle depot. His face made that shape that lived between a laugh and something else entirely. Except this time it didn't land on a laugh. You held it, Chen said. Not a question. Marcus looked back at Channel 7. The sky to the east was going orange, the specific 2-orange dawn of Kepler 442b, the one that lied about being warm. It was coming up over the ridge, and it was hitting the copper mud of the open ground, and the drainage ditch entrance was visible in the early light, and the 200 meters of channel behind it, and all the things that had happened in it through the night. I held it, Marcus said. His voice came out strange, flat, used up. Chen looked at the ditch, looked at the open ground, looked at the shapes on the grass between the ditch and the fence. He was counting. His face changed as he counted. How many came in, he said. Marcus had been counting all night, tracking by engagement, running a loose total in his head. Scouts first, 3. Then 12, then 20, or close to it, then the barrier unit, then the final push. He thought about it. 35, maybe 40. Chen looked at him alone. Chen said. The ditch helped. Chen opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the ditch and looked at Marcus, and then he put his hand on Marcus's shoulder very briefly. Just a quick grip and let go. Colonel Harris arrived 2 hours later. After the primary road and perimeters 8 and 9 were confirmed clear, the main Vethkai assault had broken at 5:40 in the morning. The primary force pulled back when the flanking vectors failed to penetrate, when the assault plan's timeline collapsed, when the numerical math stopped working. Channel 7's final casualty report, compiled from the field sweep that took most of the morning, came to 31 confirmed Vethkai soldiers in or around the drainage channel. 1 human soldier. 2 injuries, both non-critical, no deaths. Colonel Harris stood at the northern mouth of Channel 7 and looked at it for a long time without speaking. He looked at the blast damage in the choke point. He looked at the wire rigs stripped from the sensor relay. He looked at the repositioned MA7 casings. He walked the full 200 meters of the channel and looked at every position, every improvised piece of it. Then he walked out the south end and looked at the open ground and the fence. He looked at Marcus, who was sitting on the ground with his back against the fence and a new bandage on his arm, drinking coffee. Actual hot coffee. Someone had brought it from the colony, and he was holding the cup in both hands like it was the most important object in existence. "Webb," said the colonel. Marcus looked up. "They told me the ditch was empty," Marcus said. "Thought I should do something about that." Harris looked at him for a long moment. "The relay," Harris said. "You stripped it for wire. It was broken anyway. The turret sensors, also not being used. You wired grenades to the choke point walls. 4 grenades. It seemed inefficient to save them for later." Harris was quiet. He was looking at Marcus with an expression that was not quite the one it had been in his office the night before, the one that had filed Marcus under not the thing that matters. This was a different expression, the kind that came when the math changed. "Where are you from, Webb?" Harris said. "Iowa, sir." Harris nodded slowly. He looked at the ditch one more time. "Iowa," he said, like he was filing it away somewhere useful. The Vethkai after-action assessment of the assault on New Carthage was intercepted and translated 8 days later by Garrison Intelligence. Most of it was the expected analysis, breakdowns of the primary road assault, the failures at perimeters 8 and 9, the overall command failures in force allocation. One section of it was not expected. It was the subsection on Channel 7. On Drainage Channel 7, classified in the Vethkai's own pre-assault intelligence as a non-strategic approach, confirmed empty by scouts, assigned as a secondary sweep. The Vethkai after-action document used a phrase that the military linguist assigned to translation read 3 times before she committed it to the official report, because she wanted to be sure she had the tonal register right. The Vethkai word cluster, in its full military doctrinal context, translated approximately as fortified hell position, confirmed human occupation, do not reapproach without heavy support hell position, for a drainage ditch, for 1 human being and whatever he had found in his pockets. The translation was passed up the chain with a note attached, in the military linguist's own handwriting, that said simply, "See Channel 7 engagement report, 1 soldier, 3rd year cadet. Coffee stain on uniform." The note found its way to Harris's desk. Harris read it. He picked up his pen and wrote at the bottom, "Promote." Marcus Webb heard about the Vethkai report on the same day his promotion paperwork was submitted. He was in the garrison's medical unit, getting his arm properly stitched by a doctor, who kept making noises of professional disapproval at the compression bandage he had applied one-handed in the dark. Someone told him what the Vethkai had called the ditch. He sat with that for a moment. Hell position. He thought about the 200 meters of copper mud, the broken turrets and the stripped relay and the wire rigs and the carved shelves. The empty thermos at the south end, still sitting where he had left it. The blast debris in the choke point. The long night of a red light blinking and the rifle getting lighter, and the sky getting slowly, finally orange. He thought about a drainage ditch that nobody had thought worth defending, he thought. It was worth defending, he thought. Everything is worth defending, if you decide it is. The doctor finished the stitching and told him to keep it clean, which seemed like a mild request given the circumstances. Marcus thanked her. He stood up. He put his uniform jacket back on over the bandaged arm and fastened it up. The coffee stain was still there. He looked at it. He left it. He walked out into the 2-orange morning light of Kepler 442b and went to find more coffee, because some things were constant and some things kept you upright, and sometimes both things were the same thing. And he had a promotion briefing in an hour, and he intended to be awake for it. Behind him, 200 meters of drainage channel sat quiet in the early light. The enemy had called it hell. He had called it a ditch. He had been right first.